Hey guys, VaulSC here, hope that you're doing well. I recently played in a Conquest The Last Argument of Kings tournament, but it was played on Tabletop Simulator, so take from that what you will. It did take 4 different weekends to complete because of time zones and everything, but the main point is that it was played against people from various different parts of the world. I played against Americans and people from Poland, etc., etc. And it was an excellent experience, and I want to sort of take you through my report on my list and my games and my result because I was running Wadroon, which are my favorite faction to play in the online version of Conquest here. And I did manage to win the tournament, becoming first. 4-0 was the result at the end of the day. So you guys might be interested in some of the lists and the plays and the ideas that got me there. I think that if you take anything away from this video in terms of results, I just want you to remember one thing, and that is that this is the second TTS tournament we've had, and in the previous one, I think Ben came first, and I also played against Carl in that tournament and lost. Neither of those players were in this particular tournament, so my path to victory was easier as a result. So before you start reading into, oh, this Wadroon list is very strong, or oh, this guy's a really good player, there is some truth to that, but it's not the whole truth, and tournaments really are a way of seeing of the players who participated who was doing the best, and also there is some luck involved, some factors there in terms of the matchups and the scenarios and, of course, the dice rolls, so please bear that in mind. But we're going to go through my army list, and we're going to go through the army lists of all the people that I played against, and I will use the help of my saved captured footage to remind me of some of the more important plays that resulted in the overall outcome there of Wadroon doing very, very well. Wadroon was a very popular faction. We actually had quite a lot of people playing Wadroon and Dweghom specifically for some reason. And if I just remind myself, there would have been 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, approximately 13 to 14 players overall, and we didn't have any Old Dominion. I don't think we had any Sorcerer Kings. Again, there were a couple of Nords players, a couple of Spies players, but it was a lot of Dweghom and Wadroon. Wadroon, very, very strong faction, as you guys know, and Dweghom just happened to be a popular one amongst the players. It's hard to tell in advance, what the breakdown of the lineup is going to be like. So, without further ado, perhaps I will just go into the army here, and in previous videos I've talked about this army list. I've played it a number of times now. This is my take on what is a really good, well-optimized tournament army list for Wadroon. There is an argument for playing as the Speaker's version of the Chief on the Thunder Chieftain. I really love that style. But what it kind of comes down to is that Slingers are the most powerful regiment in this faction, if not the most powerful regiment in the entire game, and the Foot Chieftain gives them something. He gives tempo to everything in his warband, and being the Warlord, everybody in the entire faction, that's tribes, basically. So your veterans and your Slingers get Vanguard, and so do your Braves in this particular list. And because the Thunder Chieftain doesn't do the equivalent of that, I find it a bit of a struggle to prefer him over the Foot version. So that's how it goes. The other thing as well is that the Mastery Vision for 30 points gives all of your non-monster characters forward force, or infantry characters, we should say. With the Thunder Chieftain, you're already getting flank from the Ride the Lightning thing for your Thunder Riders anyway, so there's a bit of built-in redundancy there, whereas with the Foot Chief, you can just give it to all of your characters. Now, my Winglord Predator does not get flank, it's just the Matriarch Queen, but it's still a bargain for 2 characters. If you run a list that has, for example, a Chieftain, a Queen, and a Scion, which is also a very good build, giving them all flank is amazing because on turn 2, when the bulk of your army is hitting the table, you're getting effectively 6 cards automatically because it's 3 characters and the 3 regiments that they're in, and then you can make a few more rolls, potentially getting more mediums, and it's just such a fast army getting onto those objectives and bullying them off with Hunting Pack and Slingers and Chosen and just your Quaddle, a very general fast approach to it. The chieftain should always be Cult of Conquest. I spent a bit of time when the Wadroon got reworked trying the other cults. Just not worth it. You always want to go for Conquest because Conquest allows them to take a unit of Chosen, which are very, very strong. They are a little bit undercosted for what they do. You've got a triple activation where they and the chief can march 8 inches, then charge 6 plus d6, and then clash. And they're very good at clashing. Obviously going to go up to clash 4, cleave 1. They've got impact hits. The chief has got cleave 2 with flurry, 6 attacks. It's a very, very powerful regiment, and you just get it so cheaply. And obviously choosing Conquest allows for that. The slingers can use Conquest if they really need to, but most of the time the chanting you're going to be doing is just for singing bullets. So unfortunately the faction's a bit boring in the sense that you've got a lot of things building up the chant, but it's usually just the slingers or the chosen which are going to be spending that. My other 2 warbands are famine. The argument for that is that the other 2, well, war and death specifically give a little bit of utility, but occasionally famine's going to be helpful in a clutch situation. So when you really need to be sure that you're going to make that charge with your Winglord or your Apex or your Hunting Pack, then famine really makes the difference. Warbred can't use famine because of Juggernaut. That's already locked in at March value +5, and they can't use war either because they're already cleave 2. And if you take death, it just doesn't really help your regiments enough because most of these guys are only going to be in combat once, right? And getting the chant on them with all 3 cards when means it's not going on the slingers. It's just very rare to use it, and to get the benefit from the reroll 6s from death, you just need to be doing that frequently on a defense 4 regiment, and it's just not the case for any of these guys here. So Winglord, I find, obviously is very, very good character because you're effectively paying for a character that unlocks regiments, but he is a regiment himself. So rather than this being a like a 3-character plus 9 regiment list, it feels a bit more like a 10 regiment 2-character list because the Winglord himself can actually move around and attack independently and score, most importantly. The Hunting Pack is unlocked here. Very, very powerful regiment for the early game. You guys know that already. And we've gone for the double Predator. The Apex Predator is just a bit undercosted at the moment. He got buffed a long time ago, but being movement 8 and getting the ability to chant for Conquest or Predatory Shriek or whatever you're going to be doing, Famine, is just really powerful. And he's just great in a meta where we're seeing so many brutes and so many monsters. Even 100 Kingdoms has been given a monster now for some stupid reason. So there's almost always going to be a target for Fiend Hunter, and they even just brought out a new faction called Euroni, which is almost all brutes. So, the Apex is in a target-rich environment, right? The Queen, she's in a very basic unit of Braves, and she's got no other upgrades, but she comes with Stoic built in. So for just 100 points, the leverage you get out of the healing does kick in most games. So you're paying overall 300 points for the Queen and the Braves, and this is a unit that can almost always tank at least 1 round of combat, even from some very powerful enemy regiments. The other thing I like about the Queen is that you can deploy her nearby to the Slingers or the Hunting Pack and actually replenish them a little bit. So if you're in a bit of a shootout, Slingers are not very defensive. They will take quite a lot of wounds against enemy crossbowmen. Then the Queen can sometimes patch them out up to win that long-range firefight of attrition. So I just find the Queen generally very, very useful in that sense, getting the benefit from tribes from the chief, and obviously even the crushing force if they decided to chant, etc., etc. They don't use that very often, but still, the Queen just being there and not having to really spend any more points allows you to go for it. Arguably, I think I speak to some people who really prefer at least 7 Braves and spend the extra 70 points to have that big unit, which is getting it so much more out of the healing in the long run. But I just prefer to spread the points a bit thinner and have a wider army, because the meta at the moment calls for having more cards and more presence on the battlefield in terms of positioning and space. The Warbred is a regiment that is, I mean, these guys are not S tier. They are not the best thing that you can possibly take in a vacuum, but in this particular list, I feel they do very, very well. I always look at these guys and wonder whether I could get away with swapping them for, another Apex Predator or a Quattle, or whether I could put them down as a hunting pack, as a, Raptor Riders. The thing is that you've already got 3 lights, and Wadroon are pretty much the only faction left that can't score with their lights at all. Everybody else seems to be able to do it. I think that Old Dominion maybe are the other one that can't, for cultists, for example, and carriers. But with 3 light units, you don't really want to be going up to 4 lights that can't score, because then if you get a bit short in the late game, you might be in a position where there are 3 different objectives you need to camp on to make up a points deficit, and you've only got enough scoring units to camp on 2 of them, for example, whereas you may have had enough if your Raptor Riders were a group of Warbred. These guys are a very helpful mid-game unit. They don't need the support of chance, obviously. They can be healed by the Matriarch Queen, unless I've read the rule wrong. Let's just check what it says. Non-monster. So these guys would count at 6 wounds, defense 3. You get enough survivability for 180 points there. And if your opponent just chooses to ignore them, you set up exactly 11 inches away, get the free charge clash the following turn, and then it's like 16 attacks, clash 4, cleave 2. So they can bruise up an enemy regiment that is not really taking them seriously. They're also cheap enough that you can leave them camping a zone for the entire game. And if they were just a regiment of 3 Braves, your opponent would probably want to come near them and bully them with other combat units, but you can't bully a regiment of Warbred as easily, because if they, survive the combat and they've got 2 stands left and they strike back at you, then they can inflict a world of pain, right? So overall, it's the kind of army list that leaves a lot of flexibility for you to leverage with, skillful play. It's definitely not a skew list, despite having 2 Slingers and 2 Apex Predators. There are absolutely other versions of this that you can run, but this is what has been working for me. I will say, just in passing, that another variation of this is where instead of the Winglord Predator, you take a Scion of Conquest and you move the Chosen from the Chieftain's Warband to the Scion's Warband, or you take 2 regiments of Chosen. That's the other build I would consider, because you get even more leverage out of the Vision upgrade. Chosen, obviously very, very powerful, and at least that kind of build gives you some spell interference, which my build doesn't really have. So when you're up against like Dwegum that are triple fireballing you every turn or something like that, it does get kind of nasty when you have no spell interference whatsoever. So I will say that if I try out another version, it might be the Scion version. So with that in mind, let's just have a talk about how round 1 went. I was up against a gentleman from the States who goes by the name of Kaiser the Gold King, although I've also seen his username as Turgara on tournament results. He is from the States, and he told me that he's picking up Wadroon, and he was playing Wadroon, here is his army list here, as just an opportunity to sort of get used to a faction that he doesn't normally play. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the mirror match and just look at what he's taken in his army and spot the difference and see if we can comment on any of the differences between my approach to this faction competitively and his. And straight away we can see that he's got the exact same chieftain, and he's also got vision, and he's also got conquest. So this is not some kind of mistake where we both coincidentally had the same style. It's just because this choice is pretty much optimal for the faction and everybody knows it. Like, you give yourself the best chance of winning tournament games by doing that. He's gone to the length of spending the additional 25 points on Beads of Death. Beads of Death is an excellent item. Tenacious really pays dividends, especially on a unit that's not going to go away after getting hit by a gust of fresh air. So this chieftain's going to be in the 5 veterans, just splashing out the additional 100 points to get the extra bit of meat in there, and that is effectively 30 wounds worth of stuff. So these guys aren't going anywhere quickly. You know, when you've got 30 wounds plus Tenacious, that is a unit that sticks around, and they are creating so many tokens with Forged in Battle and with Flurry and all of that. They are really bashing in close combat very, very well. So that's the only difference between his Chieftain Warband and mine. I've gone for the Chosen instead. I think that the Chosen are better than Veterans in the long run when you are utilizing their triple activation correctly. But in his defense, he's got the Scion elsewhere in the army list with the Chosen of Conquest there, right? Elsewhere in the army list, we have the Predator, who appears to be on foot, but when you look a bit more closely, he's got the Apex Master here, and he's going to be riding the Apex, which is not something that I see a lot. I think that people have generally shied away from riding the dinosaurs in the current couple of incarnations of the game because they want to spread their points out a bit more across various regiments, and the Predator doesn't do a whole lot for the Apex Predator. So sorry to get the words jumbled, but we've got a Predator here and an Apex Predator over here. The different kinds of Predators. You've got the character riding the beast. So I wouldn't have made this decision. I think that the best way to play it is to take something from the list here, which is going to help the dinosaur in some way. My preference would have been to go with this, which is Beads of Death. He's already got that on his chief, but having Tenacious One helps to keep the dino alive a little bit longer, and it makes it slightly more likely you'll get an additional turn's worth of biting and chomping out of him. Instead, he's got Kiss of the Dinosaur, which does not affect the Apex Predator's attacks. It would be insanely broken if it did, but this is going to be on the rider. Don't get me wrong, this is one of my favorite items in the game, and it's definitely worth it for 20 points. But I would usually prefer to see this on something like a mounted Predator as on a Raptor Rider, or the Thunder Chieftain, because they've got to reroll successful defense and morale tests for any hits. So if you charge in with your Thunder Rider, you're doing brutal impact, impact hits, and you're doing your clash, and you're really in the thick of it. So you get that. The other thing that I would really like the Kiss of Dinosaur for is just the Predator in a basic unit of Slingers, who's going to be spending most of the game shooting, whereas the Predator on the Dinosaur is more likely to be traded for something and actually killed once he gets into close combat, so you get less longevity out of that item. Other choice we've got here is Death. Now, Death allows you to reroll sixes when you're chanting, but it's not going to be particularly helpful on the hunting packs. And the Apex Predator, again, he's not going to be withstanding round after round after round of close combat, most likely. So I think that my preference is Famine for the reasons I explained to you guys earlier. And I think War for Cleave 1 won't matter because you've already got Cleave 2 on the Predator. War is probably the best choice for the hunting pack, because Cleave 1 on that early game charge can make more of a difference. He's got the double hunting pack, which is very, very good. Like, don't get me wrong, this is a sick build, but my only criticism is that you've got double slingers, double hunting pack, which is 4 light regiments, which means that you could potentially run out of scoring effort later in the game, and that's my only concern about it. Scion of Conquest, absolutely solid. We've got 4 Chosen of Conquest, which, to be fair, makes the most out of Chosen. They're only additional 60 points each, and for that you get a beefy 6 wounds, and obviously they have the impact hits and the Clash 3 Cleave 1. They're a very strong regiment. I don't fault them for taking the 4th stand, because you're going to be in a regiment where you have effectively 5 stands. It's going to be hard to shatter and break your guys. Can't say that, though, of the Braves. There are 4 of them, and what I worry about here is that if your opponent charges these Braves, who are just Resolve 3, no Fearless, they're not as brave as they look. Defense 2, Shield, so if they get hit by something that's got a bit of Cleave and maybe a bit of Terrifying, like a group of Moroi come on in and they just kill 3 stands of Braves, well, you automatically lose your 4th stand because they've been broken and then shattered, so the math on that's not that appealing. So I don't love that option. Everything else here, though, is solid. Go through a bit of a rundown of what actually happened in the game itself. Obviously, as you expect, it's Slingers versus Hunting Pack in the early game. We both have 2 regiments of Slingers, but I only have 1 Hunting Pack to his 2 regiments of Hunting Pack, and the first real interesting situation came up when he decided to move one of his Hunting Pack regiments all the way over to the other side of the table to very close to my deployment zone, where I just brought in a regiment of Warbred in turn 2, and he positioned them where he really should have. He got them into the flank where the Warbred can't immediately charge them, and if he wins the dice roll, he can just flank me and use opportunists and get 19 attacks with 3s re-rolling into the flank where I have to re-roll my successful resolve checks. And initially, I was a bit worried about that move, but the thing is that I still had regiments left to bring on the table that particular turn, and I'm not too sure if he was thinking about that, because after I considered my options, I realized that I could bring in the Queen and the Braves and march them directly between the Hunting Pack and the Warbred, obscuring the flank of the Warbred in such a way that I would take the charge from the front on the Braves. So what would happen is that he'd do 19 attacks on 3s, he'd miss half of them, I'd block half of them with defense, pass most of the resolves because the Queen's going to be on resolve 5 effectively with Indomitable, and then attacking back I'd be able to destroy his regiment, and I'd be up a regiment. I was considering maybe just leaving it alone because it does keep the Braves very far back on the table and sort of slows me down a bit. But if you think about it, going into the mid game where you are 1 regiment up on your opponent, especially in a mirror match, is a pretty big deal. So that ended up happening, and I got a big advantage out of that. Another situation came up where he let the other Hunting Pack regiment get charged by my Hunting Pack, so a lot of small dinos attacking each other, and the dice roll that I made was horrific. I flubbed just about everything and didn't even kill 1 stand of Hunting Pack when it's my 19 dice against his guys at Evasion 1 or whatever it is, so that was heartbreaking. But slowly throughout the game, I managed to claw back the position a bit more by just out-activating him, really, in the mid-game with better shooting and better angles. And it came down to a spot where he was going to be moving his big blocks of veterans into the middle of the table where I had my Warbred and my Brave, so I could really stall him there. And he decided to aggressively go after the objective with his slingers, because we were playing the breakout one where you actually have to kill your opponent's objective marker on the central circle. And after he'd done that, he left his slingers in a position where I could simply attack them. So I started to claw a bit of a lead in the center. Also, his mounted Apex Predator, so the Predator riding the Apex Predator, was facing off against the Chosen of Conquest for one of the side objectives. And my threat range was, not too much different to his, but the thing is I can do a move 8 charge and then clash, whereas he can only achieve a similar kind of threat range with March charge. So I decided to go for it on a turn where if I didn't one-shot him, he'd probably get a good chance to attack back and do a lot of damage with Kiss of the Dinosaur and the obviously the Predator's the Apex Predator's own attacks. But I was lucky enough to one-round him with the impact hits, not just the impact hits, the impact hits from the Chosen, plus the Clash 4 Cleave 1s and the Chief's Flurry Clash 2 Cleave 2s and all the resolve checks, and managed to destroy the Apex Rider, which was a big deal. The Quaddle managed to get into the back rank to tie up his slingers and prevent me from taking a lot of range shooting. And then on the other flank, it ended up being his Scion against several regiments at the end. So another Apex Predator plus my smaller unit of veterans and the Queen with the Braves. And when it's 3 versus 1, it doesn't really matter that he's got a very powerful regiment in the sense that he's got 4 chosen stands plus the Scion. When you get boxed in like that, there's not much you can do. So by the time we got into the late game, I had lost maybe 2 regiments and I'd completely wiped everything out. So it was a decisive win at that point. Pretty happy with the way that my list performed against another Wadroon list. Again, it does come down to some early positioning and a little bit of lucky dice rolls, but overall was very happy with that performance. So if we continue on to the second opponent, we'll take a look at that. So this was Heliker from, I think he's from Indiana. He's got a game store over there, and he was running this. The Whole Rake, which is the Warlord, and Double Hull Warriors, Double Drake, and then you've got all of the Flame Berserkers and Wardens with the Karawigs over here. And the thinking behind this list is that You absolutely rush them with all of your stuff into the middle, and you will totally outscore them because of the bonus command stands that your Rag provides. And of course, the Flame Berserkers are scoring right off the bat without even having to cast Rancor on them. So they become very powerful in that regard. My opponent, when he showed up for the game, had misread the supremacy or had misread the army rules for Dwegum for the whole Rag. He believed that if you have a Keroueg or a Steel Shaper or a Sorcerer, that dictates which of the creeds you have to take. And because the whole Rag is not named in that group of rules, that allows the whole Rag to pick one or two of the creeds. And then we had to explain to him further down the track after that game that no, it's just the case that you get one of the creeds if you've taken the prerequisite of picking one of those other characters. So for this game, we were treating it as though he had Ardent Creed, which he didn't. Luckily, it didn't impact the game very much. Obviously, his units rallying automatically didn't really come up in any meaningful way. Taking a look back through the footage of the second game, I was extremely lucky to have drawn the scenario called Echelon, which has only two objectives, one closer to my side, one closer to his side, with a few destructible items in the middle to get points from. And the reason why this was so fortunate for me is that it allowed me to just camp my home objective without him outscoring me on it due to his bonus command stands from the Hold Reg Supremacy. If it had been a mission where we both have to go into the center to collect points from a mission like the one I played in the previous round, for example, then it would probably take me too long to kill his objectives and get them off the middle zones, and he'd be in such a scoring lead by the end game, I'm not too sure if I could have won it that way. But I was very lucky. He was, of course, able to pull a bit of a lead in the mid-game by killing the destructible objectives faster than I was able to, but it didn't put me at that much of a deficit. So the game plan was to try and eventually outmuscle and out-attrition him, and at the very last couple of turns, just kill the remaining troops that he had on his side of the board and pull through that way. So that's pretty much what happened. Throughout the game, I was being assaulted by various different waves of Flame Berserkers and Wardens, etc., etc. But thanks to the solid line I'd set up with shooting and with the Quaddle and various different things that I had going for my army, I was able to beat through that. There was one specific moment that I felt was almost like a turning point, really, was where he had already deployed his Ironclad Drake onto the side that he was defending on, and he had brought over one unit of Hold Warriors to just try and outflank me on the other side and force me to commit a bit more to that side. And I really only had a little bit defending that side. And what he could have done, because I'd pretty much deployed everything at that point, is that he could have come around there with his other Ironclad Drake and potentially have got onto the zone and pulled ahead a little bit that way and gone ahead on scoring. But he didn't end up doing that. He put both Drakes on the other side of the table, and he put one Drake on one side of the table and the other one on the other side, rather than doubling them up. And I was able to defend the home base zone, so to speak. And on the other side, when the other Drake broke through and started killing objectives, I was eventually able to weaken it and destroy it with slingers. But crucially, the score line stayed relatively even. It wasn't that far behind, so that by the time we got round to like turn 7, turn 8, I was able to get into the flank with the Quaddle and just box him in on that corner and eventually get the Braves in there and destroy what he had left, camping the home base zone, and then just do the double round of scoring for the last couple of turns, which was able to give me the win. But I was very concerned that his style of list posed such a problem for my build. And again, I'd be interested to see how things would go on a different scenario, because I feel like that style of Dwegum list does pose a little bit of a problem for what I'm running there. I can't really win as effectively when the slingers are getting overrun and I don't have like multiple turns of continuously shooting at his weaker units to give me the win later on. If it's just peace trading and his stuff is scoring faster than my stuff, then that's a real problem. But luckily, I managed to get there in the end and go on to game 3. For game 3, I was up against Dexander. Another American player who I've played against many times, and we've often played with Droon against city-states, and he really is a fan of running off meta lists. He understands that you're meant to run lots of chariots, and you're meant to run the Talos and various different things, but because he enjoys Conquest more this way, he's running the off-meta style, and I really respect that. We do need more people in the competitive community who are willing to play something which is completely off the wall. And let me be clear, this list is not a meta list. It's not, built around what is currently optimal in city-states. So what have we got? The Polemarch with Creosaur's Helmet and Atlanta's Spear. Most people just take the Blades of Achilles because of the Cleave 4. These items are still pretty good, so losing Inspire from that is really powerful. Atalanta's obviously really powerful. And what he does is he puts the Polemarch in the Sacred Band. This is a very tough unit, and they can actually pump out a lot of healing onto the friendly Agema nearby. And then you've got the Agema, obviously, with Sacred Band auxiliaries to use Liquid Formation and get a lot of really fast charges. Personally, I prefer to run city-states with one group of Agema and with mobility on the Polemarch, and then you take some chariots. But that's boring. This guy's running something a lot more interesting than that. Satoroi, of course, I feel like these guys don't hit often enough to be worth 200 points. Because sometimes they'll be worth slightly, they'll perform slightly more than their points imply. You give them some credit, but there are so many games where they actually do nothing or not enough that they aren't really a meta pick anymore. Because they can certainly be out-deployed, and you sort of are cut off from the rest of your army. And Conquest is often about supporting your regiments collectively to get advantages, to punish, inconsistencies in your opponent's positioning, etc., etc. Then we have got the Eidolon with 3 groups of Inquisitors. Despite being, a similar Inquisitor-style guy himself, he's not actually joining the Inquisitors at all. He's with the Thorikites, the Thorikides. And that's because of Ultimate Soma. He becomes a +3 stand, so he can turn the light unit into scoring. So that's the whole idea of that there. For the round 3 game against Ixander, we were playing the mission Grind Them Down, which is something that you want to track the mechanics of if you get into the late game and it's turning into be a bit more of a scoring race as opposed to attrition. But honestly, the mission for this particular battle didn't really matter very much, because it was very much decided around about the halfway mark based on how the fight was going. Initially, in the first few turns, I was very worried that my line was going to get very quickly overrun by his very fast-moving stuff. Inquisitor's obviously very speedy, and Agema, of course, with Liquid Formation, able to tilt around and get a bit of a charge boost, as you guys know. Not to mention the Satoroi, which come on from your own board edge, the enemy's board edge, which is a bit of a struggle, because one of the win conditions of my list is having the slingers continuously barraging turn after turn after turn and just withering them with the weight of fire while the rest of the army kind of ties them up. But if you lose your slingers straight away and you're having to sort of peace trade a little bit, and they're surviving for a bit longer than you in close combat, that could be a real problem. So what ended up happening is that the Satoroi did end up arriving towards the mid-game and came in behind my regiments, where I'd effectively blocked him with a unit of veterans, allowing him to charge the veterans in the rear. But of course, my slingers can then turn around and shoot at that same unit of Satoroi, which kind of breaks them and stops them from continuing to charge. Elsewhere, he had been getting his Thorikites and his Inquisitors into some of my regiments, but as always, the Queen and the Braves were able to kind of bog him down in the center of the table, fighting against Agema and not dying immediately. And that's just one of the reasons why I really value the Queen, is that she can just allow your unit to hold on a little bit longer. And of course, my opponent bringing in his Sacred Band and able to heal up the Agema as well. But the longer the game goes on, the better it is for me, because he's running 10 cards in his army list, 2 characters and 8 regiments. Whereas for me, it's more like 3 characters Predators and 9 regiments, but because of the Winglord Predator, as we talked about earlier in this video, it feels a bit more like 2 characters and 10 regiments, so I can slowly outmaneuver him with the positioning of combat troops on the board in the long run. So on the right-hand flank, you can sort of see where I've got the Chief with the Chosen of Conquest getting the jump on the enemy regiment of Agema, and in the long run, they do quite a lot of casualties to each other, but because I've got like 1 additional regiment relative to him, I can join the fight with the Winglord and the Apex Predator in the long run and just jump into these battles where I'm at an advantage. The other thing that really is useful for me is that the Apex Predators, which I have 2 of, are going up against 3 regiments of Inquisitors, which are Fiends, they're Brutes. I get rerolls to hit, and that allows me to chew through them very quickly with things like Deadly Blades. So that resulted in me being able to systematically sort of pick the army apart, and when he runs out of things to put on the battlefield, and when I can see where his entire army is, it's a lot easier for me to plan my movements and get around and cut him off and attack him from various different angles that doesn't really work in his favor. And I had at least 1 unit of slingers surviving reasonably late into the game to get enough damage from shooting. So it came down to a spot where realistically it's just his Sacred Band regiment left alive. He's restricted to 1/2 of the battlefield. I've got the rest of the battlefield covered. If he comes after me, then he doesn't really score enough, and because I had a lead on the scoring, it was inevitable that I was going to win that one. So we simply called it halfway into the game, and I managed to win pretty convincingly on points at that stage. Let us go on to my last game, which was against lovely Polish gentleman. I think it goes by the name of Karol, Karol, on Discord. And this was quite a fearsome Dwegum list because it's Tempered Creed with 2 Sorcerers and 3 Drakes. One thing I misidentified when I read his army list is that he's actually got his Warlord going for Magma School and the secondary Sorcerer going for Fire School. And the thinking behind that is that with the Warlord, you're planting down the template, and then you're doing the blast, the blast near to the magmatic seep, or whatever it's called. And that's a bit of a combo. And what I normally see is the secondary Sorcerer latching onto that template and adding his own Pyroblast to that. And that's how you sort of start building it up. And when neither Sorcerer is in range, you both put down the template to build up the tokens. But what he's doing is he's just counting on the Warlord Sorcerer being in range as frequently as he can, and the secondary Sorcerer simply being there to cast Fireball. And the thinking there is that if you have Fireball on your Warlord or Fire School, then half the time you're using the less effective spell that has no armor piercing. I prefer doubling down on 2 Magma or 2 Fire, that's just me, but his take on it was very interesting. He's also running Chthonic Flame, which is very nasty. It means that you reroll resolve checks. I can't remember what the ruling is, but I get the feeling that if you hit the flank of a regiment with a spell, they've got to reroll resolve checks anyway. I might be wrong about that. Can't remember what the ruling was there, but well worth looking up. We also have the Ardent Kerouac, of course, adding more tokens to the pool of cheating tokens. Flame Berserkers, just a must. They're probably the best regiment that Dweg have at the moment for the early scoring. And then, of course, Magma Forged. I'm not too sure why Halika wasn't running Magma Forged when they're very similar to Wardens. These guys are arguably better with the Cleave too, but Wardens, of course, have a couple of slight differences that maybe you prefer. I'm not sure. When we got to playing that game, I realized that again I had become very lucky in the sense that the scenario favored me in this matchup. When I had previously played against Dwegum early in the tournament, it was the full close combat melee army Dwegum that has no shooting at all, and we were in a scenario where he would be forced to come over to my side of the table and try to get to the zone that I was camping in my corner. So I didn't really have to worry about trying to outscore him despite his additional command stands worth of scoring from the Hold Regs supremacy, right? But in this particular mission, which is Maelstrom, where we're forced to go into the middle to capture these circular zones in the center of the table, I'm playing against the Dwegum gun line, which wants to stay away from you. So you can see how I'm lucky in that sense that I get to play against the gun line when he's forced to come into the center. allowing me to get into combat with his drakes and his Fireforge more quickly. And that's ultimately what kind of game we had. Initially, we were both trying to use the obscuring terrain of the forests to avoid each other shooting, the slingers versus the Fireforge and Ballistae, etc. But once the close combat started to break out and you get the Quaddle Winglord going after his Ballistae and things coming on from various sides, it started to get a little bit ugly for the Dwegum. I noticed one point in particular where I definitively felt like I had an edge in the game was where he decided to bring on his secondary tempered sorcerer on the Drake with the Fire School, and he came along from the side through the reinforcement line with the intention of standing on the objective just with the corner of his base while still remaining in the flank of the veterans unit, which were also trying to score, so that he couldn't be countercharged by the veterans, but at the same time he could shoot at them and hit them with spells, and that was his plan for overcoming me on that side of the table. But again, he didn't realize that I still had a lot of stuff left to deploy, and for that turn in particular, I was able to bring on an Apex Predator opposite that sorcerer and in its flank, allowing me to charge the following turn without really any fear of repercussions. And the Apex Predator is just about the worst thing you can get charged by if you're a Hellbringer Drake, because it's got Fiend Hunter for the rerolls. You can get the rerolls on the impacts as well as the 11 clash hits, and then at clash 4 you're getting quite a lot of hits through at cleave 2 with deadly blades, which your opponent is definitely going to want to use the elemental potency tokens on to clear up, and you're going to drain them of tokens very quickly, and if they run out of tokens, it's going to mean that your Apex Predator can quite often one-shot that Drake because of the sheer number of hits and the terrifying on the resolve checks, and in this case rerolls on the successful resolve checks, which is a disaster because then you lose the Drake and the character, which you were relying on for all that shooting and those spells as well. So once that happened, I was able to effectively free up that zone. The Winglord was able to stick around for a bit. All he had left to contest that side was the Magma Forge going up against, slingers and veterans and Apex Predator, which didn't really work out well for him on that side. And then on the opposite side of the table, I had the Chief and the Chosen moving on to an objective, and he hadn't really deployed anything to combat them, so I could just score freely. But when I realized that I was being allowed to score freely when the rest of the battle was raging and it was going to come down to attrition anyway, the Chief and the Chosen were content to leave that objective and just go after some nearby Fireforge to kill them, and eventually put him in a position where he was getting flanked and running out of options. In the center, he had double Drakes. He had the Warlord character that was doing a fair bit of damage with the double magma spell, especially with the slingers being in range on a hill, where if you cast the magma spell on a piece of zonal terrain, it does the hits to everybody on the hill, which does effectively double damage against 2 units of slingers camping there. They have defense 1, which goes to 0, no evasion, they take resolve checks. It was a bit of a murder, really, but at that point it didn't really matter because I had enough stuff coming into the center zone to fight their way to that final sorcerer, and eventually I was in a position where he was getting surrounded by absolutely everything. My opponent eventually getting tabled, and we're just adding up the remaining points that I was able to score at the end of the game, effectively contesting all three, or seizing all 3 zones simultaneously for a consecutive number of turns to put me in a big lead. Was a really cool tournament. I was really grateful to get that good of a result. It didn't leave me in a position where I felt like I needed to go and change anything about my list. I love the Winglord. I think if I'm going to try anything differently, it would really just be the Scion. For a bit of spell interference and maybe for double Chosen, but even then, the Winglord is a lot more fun. The Winglord was actually very useful every single game. You spend 2 or 3 turns just hanging back and shooting and scoring, but then when you bounce in for the kill, you do a march charge and then clash next turn. It can really bully some enemy light regiments like Whole Ballistae and slingers and all of that. So yeah, we're doing very, very strong, and looking forward to playing in some more events soon, especially online. And, of course, if you guys haven't already checked out my How to Play Tabletop Simulator video, please go and do that, and hit me up for a game. I've got plenty of time to play you, and we'll see how that works out. But thanks for watching this, as always, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.